Audio Jungle.
In the olden days, there lived a queen named Nang Kaki who was famed for her great beauty.
Audio Jungle.
She was married to the king of Paranasi and had everything her heart desired. But she was sensuous.
Audio Jungle.
Her beauty and charm were objects of delight and attraction for all men. Men desired her and she always gave into them. So, whenever the Thai people who speak of the lowest of all female, they refer to Nang Kaki. Any Thai woman who is referred to by this name will consider herself insulted and degraded in the vilest possible terms. Thus, Queen Kaki was the origin of the word Ikaki, which means a woman, even worse than a prostitute. During the time of King Pamatat of Paranasi, there was a powerful Garuda by the name of Ventai, who lived on a mountain top, higher than any human being could ever reach. His palace was a divine abode at the farthest end of the earth, surrounded by luscious gardens of gorgeous, fragrantly blossoming trees. The palace was always filled with the cool breeze, and the air was constantly filled with the music of birds that sang everywhere. Everything in and around his palace was so beautiful and delightful. Ventai lived happily on top of this mountain in his luxurious palace and flew to all corners of the earth, visiting exotic and pleasant lands. There also lived at this time a kind of divine being called the Kontan. The Kontans were heavily musicians. As their music was so divine, they played music at royal courts or only for the gods. Nobody could play like them. At the court of King Pamatat of Paranasi, there was one Kontan called Natguen. King Pamatat enjoyed playing chess. His fame for playing chess spread far and wide, and none could ever beat him at chess. Ventai, having heard that King Pamatat was highly skilled at chess, wanted to try his hand. He disguised himself as a handsome young man and came into the palace of Pamatat, where he challenged the king to a game of chess. They agreed that once every 7 days they would play chess together. During the chess game, some of Queen's female attendants speared Ventai from behind the curtains. Impressed by his handsome appearance and dignified air, they scurried back to tell the others in the bedchamber, who all crowd allowed to see Ventai from inside the inner chamber. When the news reached Queen Kaki, her curiosity brought her out to see Ventai for herself. As she peeked at Ventai, he happened to look up from his chessboard straight into the queen's beautiful eyes. The two looked at each other, and Ventai felt a chill run down his spine. So strong was his desire to possess the queen. He played badly, completely mindless of what he was doing. The queen was also smitten with the handsome face of young Ventai. The behavior of these two people did not escape the eyes of the court musician Natguen the Kontan. He wondered to himself why the queen was exchanging looks with a stranger like Ventai. After the game, Ventai took leave of the king and left the palace. The queen returned to her room and threw herself on her bed in a dreamy state, thinking of the handsome young man. But Ventai did not go very far. He speared the queen to her bedroom window. The Garudas were mythological birds with great magical power. Otherwise, they could not have lived at the end of the earth on a mountain top, out of reach for mortal men. When Tai caused a thick cloud to cover the earth and darken the sky, then flew to the window, took the queen in his strong arms and flew off towards his abode in the clouds. The queen terrified, but not for long. The soothing sweet was of Wentai, the warmth of his body touching hers, his descriptions of exotic praise she had never seen, and his declaration of love gradually calmed her fears and gave her pleasant feelings of desire. When they reached Wentai's beautiful palace, he took her to bathroom and bathed her, gave her divine and delicious food, and placed her gently on his bed. Like a proper lady, Nang Kaki discussed her true feelings and displayed much shyness at the great audacity and liberty of Wentai's actions. But Wentai was skillful in the ways of wooing a woman. He whispered words of love, stroked her and gently caressed her. This was love of a new kind that Pomatat had never shown her before. Each caress made Nang Kaki relinquish more and more of her body to Wentai, until she eventually completely succumbed to his embraces. The lover enjoyed perfect and complete happiness in the heavenly abode, far removed and unseen by the rest of the world. Wentai forgot everything and became reluctant to go out to tend to his errands. Whenever he had to go away, he would leave late and return early, never staying the night anywhere. In the evening, the two would enjoy happiness together, and their love play would always start anew, as if they could never have enough of each other's love. Nang Kaki had completely forgotten her husband, whom she had left behind on earth. Love in heaven was so much more divine, and Wentai was so vigorous and untiring. Meanwhile, back on earth, when the dark house had cleared away, the queen's attendants suddenly realized that their queen had disappeared. They ran to inform the king, and a thorough search was made everywhere. Yet, no trace of the queen could be found. The king was very sad indeed. Not when the Khontan approached the king, informing him that he suspected Wentai to have abducted her. This enraged the king. His face became red and he gnashed his teeth. The Khontan then said he would prove it. He would follow the Garuda in search of the truth. How can you do that? The king asked. That's easy, replied the Khontan. According to his promise, Wentai will return to play chess with your majesty again in 7 days' time. After the game, I will follow him back to his place. After 7 days, Wentai reluctantly took leave of Nang Kaki, who did not want to see him go. But Wentai replied that if he didn't show up for his chess game, the king would suspect him. So he had to appear to keep the king's suspicions at bay. So that day, Wentai played chess with the king as usual. Not Gwen was lady nearby. At the end of the day, Wentai rushed to hide behind a tree, where he transformed himself back into a Garuda again, not noticing that Natguen had followed him. Natguen had transformed himself into a small flea and settled himself on the Garuda's wing. When Wentai flew back to his mountaintop palace, Natguen was with him. Upon reaching the palace, Wentai changed back into a young man and went inside. Natguen also changed back into a man and sneaked in behind Wentai.
Audio Jungle.
Wentai wasted no time in hurrying back to make love to the queen, who welcomed him in a passionate embrace. She had been eagerly awaiting his return and scolded Wentai for keeping her waiting. Wentai embraced her and tried to undo her robe, which was hiding her lovely breast, but she pushed him away and resisted. "Why did you resist me?" asked Wentai. "When there is no one here but the two of us." The birds might see us, warned Nang Kaki. Let them see, Wen Tai replied. There are only divine, happy birds up here. Everybody is happy up here. And so saying, he laid bare her breast and continued. You see, to hide away such a beautiful thing is a sin. And so the love-making went on while Naguen looked on. It was more than he could bear, as he had become excited beyond measure and completely forgotten his mission of seeking the truth to report to the king. The sight became even more unbearable when, after much embracing and kissing almost every part of the naked queen's body, Wen Tai picked her up and carried her off to the bedroom. Now, Naguen could hear only the disturbing noises of Wen Tai in every way, clearly, not against her will. Naguen suffered a sleepless night, tortured by the thought of the sensuous noises he had heard. When Wen Tai left to do his errands, the next day the queen was still lying on her back, naked and without a care whether her body was covered or not. Naguen sneaked up to her. Consumed with desire, he couldn't resist throwing himself upon her, embracing her, kissing her, and touching her everywhere. At first thinking it was Wen Tai returning to her, she jumped to realize it was Naguen and demanded to know what he was doing there. I've been watching what you and Wen Tai have been doing, and it incited me to come to you too and ask for your love, was Naguen's reply. Queen was abashed and hid her face, but Naguen turned her face back and began to kiss her. After a while, her love was aroused, for Naguen also knew how to be a skillful lover, and she gradually responded. It had been something since Wen Tai had left her, and her desire had been left unsatisfied. She completely surrendered to Naguen and let him have his way with her until his desire was satisfied. Naguen kept making love to her repeatedly, as if he could never have enough, until it was finally time for him to withdraw, because it was time for Wen Tai's return. Now it was Wen Tai's turn to play the role of lover. Nang Kaki pretended that she had been impatiently awaiting his return, but then insisted that he mustn't return any earlier just for her sake, as she didn't want to stand in the way of his work. It humiliated Naguen's heart to see his queen now in the arms of another man. Barry had Wen Tai left the next morning for his daily round when Naguen sprang from his hiding place to embrace the queen, and thus the game of love went from day into night and from night into day with endless pleasure for Nang Kaki. There was no rest for her, but she enjoyed all the more because the two kinds of love were quite different. The 7 days passed, and once again it was time for Wen Tai to return to earth for a game of chess with King Pomatat. Naguen took the opportunity to return as a free among Wen Tai's wing feathers, and for the first time she threw herself on her bed, crying from loneliness. Wen Tai landed on earth and hurried to the king in the shaft of the young man, with the Khontan Naguen following closely behind him. Because of Wen Tai's presence, Naguen indicated with gestures to the king that he had fired the queen up in Wen Tai's palace. Wen Tai played chess with the king until evening, then rushed off. King Pomatat came to hear Naguen's report, but the latter rambled on with long digressions without getting to the point, boasting about his magical powers in reaching Wen Tai's palace, which no mortal man could reach. The king impatiently pressed Naguen to tell him if he had seen the queen and whether she was suffering and missing him. Not in the least, your majesty, replied Naguen. She was happy up there, enjoying Wen Tai's love without a thought to your majesty. The king was dumbstruck. Not Gwen continued. There was also someone you should have pity on, and that was my poor self. But why? Demanded the king. The queen became very angry when she saw me, because I had discovered her secret. If she had told the Garuda, that would have been the end of me. But how did you escape from her wrath? Asked the king. Not Gwen hesitated, but the king demanded to know everything. Then Not Gwen explained that he had used love to appease the queen and had told her that he had followed her everywhere, even to the Garuda's palace, solely in search of her love. The ploy succeeded, and the queen gave him her love. The king was infuriated and reached for his sword, but Not Gwen pleaded with him not to be angry, as it was the only one way to save himself and thus return alive to report back to His Majesty. Besides, it would be a way to make Wen Tai give up the queen and return her to His Majesty. The king then realized that it wasn't Not Gwen's fault after all. Not Gwen replied that it was quite easy. Next time Wen Tai came, he would sing a love story starting with the queen's abduction, how he had followed Wen Tai's woman without Wen Tai's knowledge all this time. This would break Wen Tai's heart, and he would surely give up the queen. When he realized he was just another fool for the queen. Next time Wen Tai arrived, Not Gwen started to sing the story of the Garuda's beautiful Shimpli palace in the sky. Wen Tai was shocked that someone on earth could know the secret corners of his palace. Not Gwen continued to sing the song of love, of the beauty of the queen of in Shimpli palace, and how he had won her love. He sang of his great sorrow and grief at having to leave her. When Tai was red in face, he turned towards Not Gwen, asking, "Have you been to Shimpli that you know it so well? How could you reach where no mortal men have ever reached before?" Not Gwen replied that there was nothing on earth that man could not achieve. Man could even conquer the universe, cross rivers and deserts if he want to. Could you tell me the secret of how you got to the Garuda's palace? When Tai insisted. Quite easy, was Not Gwen's reply. The Garuda took me there in his wing, and I was discussed as a flea. I stayed at the Shimpli palace for 7 days and enjoyed the queen's love all that time. What a hardship it was to depart. When Tai was furious, but pretended that it had nothing to do with him. He rushed back to his palace as soon as the chess game was over. Queen Kaki was there to greet him at the palace entrance, but he was deaf to her words of love. Infuriated, he took her down to earth and dumped her outside the king's palace. Thus, Not Gwen's plan succeeded. The king rose the next morning to find the queen ready and waiting with loving embraces. The furious king refused to listen to any of her excuses and protestations of love and fidelity. He ordered her to be cast off in a raft and floated down the river to the sea. But the love story of Nang Kaki did not end there. While floating in the sea, she came upon a junk carrying a merchant, who picked her up and let her rest in the cabin. In the evening, the merchant looked in on her under the pretext of asking how she was faring. But while she was thinking of how to thank him, he began making advances to her. The two understood each other, and it was not long before the merchant was sleeping with Nang Kaki. He was unable to resist such a beautiful woman, and her thirst for love was inflamed again. They reached a beach where they alighted and wandered about alone until reaching the shade of a tree. They made love in the wilderness before falling asleep. A band of robbers came by during their nap, and the leader of the band was dazzled when he set eyes on Nang Kaki. He won her all to himself, despite the protest of his band, who insisted that whenever they found treasure, they must divide the booty among them. The angry robbers thus killed their leader as he was making love to the terrified Nang Kaki, who fled into the forest while the rest of the robbers started fighting over her. In this country, there lived a king named Thosawong. He ruled over the country called Vaisali. His wife had just died in childbirth and he was heartbroken, having lost all pleasure in women. It so happened that he had come to that part of the forest with his men, and finding Nang Kaki in full fight, asked her why she was running. In tears, Nang Kaki cried that she was all alone in the world and had no place to live. Her last protector, a hermit in the forest, had just died and left her all alone. King Thosawong then assured her that he would take her back to his palace because he too was very much alone and lonely, and she was very beautiful. The two returned to the king's palace thinking that they were going to live happily ever after. It seemed that no matter how bad Nang Kaki was, men always forgave her because she was forced by her circumstance to accept love as her only protection against bad men, who would blame her for it. Thus thought her husband King Pomatat, who eventually passed away from heartbreak over her. As he had no heir, the nobles invited Gawain to succeed the throne, and he became known as King Barom Pomatat. He prayed for Nang Kaki as well, and no other woman could repeat her in his heart. Thus he sought for news of her far and wide, until one day a wandering merchant told him of her whereabouts. He sent an ambassador to King Thosawong demanding her return, but of course, King Thosawong refused to give her up. A battle between the two countries ensued, in which Barom Pomatat killed Thosawong, entered his enemy palace in search of Kaki, and finally found her in an inner chamber. His joy at finding her again was so great that he took her back to his palace, where they both enjoyed their former love again, happier than ever before.